Welcome to part 2 of the kitchen safety module. My name is Patrick Hersey. I'm a chef professor at Fanshawe College. I was involved early on in the Food Families program, and I'm happy to be back as part of this module to share my experience as a chef. By now, you would have just watched the video for part 1 of the module with Heather Thomas, explaining the core 4 practices of food safety and explaining the blacklight activity. For part 2, this is a very hands-on module as it will guide participants through some knife safety and how to best utilize your knives to prepare ingredients. In this process, we'll be preparing a recipe with the participants that they'll have a chance to prepare and take home with them. Feel free to cook any recipe. However, we have provided a recipe for a chicken and vegetable stir fry. All the necessary documents are available to you on the Food Families website. For this module, we'll be looking at how to use and how to not use the following 4 knives: French knife, boning knife, herring knife, and serrated knife. We'll also demonstrate the importance of using a sharpening steel to properly maintain your knives. The first knife we'll look at is the French knife. The French knife is considered an all-purpose knife, and this is what many would consider the go-to knife in the kitchen. A lot of people will use this for a wide variety of cutting. This can be used to cut pretty much any fruit or vegetable and most meat products as well. Okay, one should be careful given the size of the knife, all right, and its potential for danger, of course, when handling the knife. The most important thing to consider is its size and obviously how sharp the blade is. We'll look at a couple of key ways to hold the French knife when cutting fruits, vegetables, and meats. The boning knife has more specific uses. Okay, as the name implies, it works especially well when butchering meats, removing bones, or removing meat from bones. As a smaller knife, this is a knife that some people favor because the blade is a little bit smaller, but something people need to keep in mind is that it's not necessarily suited for every use. The paring knife is very handy in the kitchen because, again, it's a very multi-purpose knife that could be used for a wide variety of things. Its main uses would involve peeling and trimming a wide variety of fruits and vegetables. The serrated knife is a very important knife as well, and the main difference is the serrated edge or the teeth along the side of the knife. This makes it ideal for cutting things like pastries or anything that's kind of tough on the outside but soft on the inside. And the idea is to tear through the tougher exterior in order to properly slice. So we always encourage people to use this knife when cutting things like breads and pastries and to avoid using other knives that don't have a serrated edge. And this is a common problem. Not only could it potentially affect the look of the product, but one could also potentially cut themselves, right, if they don't use the right knife. So I think the important thing to pass on is choosing the right knife for the job, all right? And it's not to suggest that we need a vast array of knives. Really, these 4 core knives will do pretty much anything you need to do in the kitchen. It's just a matter of using them in a safe manner and using the right knife for the job. First thing we'll look at is the cutting board itself. Now, an important thing to pass on is the fact that the cutting board should be firmly planted to the table. We can do this a variety of ways. Some wet paper towel, a damp tea towel, something laid flat underneath, just a little bit smaller than the cutting board, so we can place the cutting board on top, push it down, and the cutting board isn't going to move. In fact, more accidents happen because cutting boards are moving around, knives are slipping, and fingers are getting cut. So securing the cutting board is an essential first step. Now, when working on a recipe like the chicken and vegetable stir fry, I think it's also important to consider the order in which you work. When we consider food safety, all right, one of the biggest concerns is cross-contamination and the fact that people don't necessarily clean or wipe down well enough between jobs. So I would recommend that we start with the non-meat items first, in this case all of the vegetables, all right, and then cut your meat items last. And this will essentially minimize the risk of cross-contamination between the raw meat and the vegetables. Once the participants are ready to go, the cutting board has been secured to the table. We're ready to move on to cut our vegetables and our meat, prepare for, in this case, our stir fry. Something that might be worth mentioning, whenever possible, to use a honing steel to maintain your knives. Something important to get across to the participants is that a properly sharpened knife is always much safer to use than one that is dull. Quite often one can purchase a knife kit that includes a honing steel, and as I mentioned, it's definitely worth using. The first thing we're going to work with is our onion, and we'll do a couple of different cuts. Now, a lot of people don't really like working with onions. They're a little smelly. Okay, sometimes they make us cry. So I always say the faster, more efficiently we can get through this. Okay, but while also kind of observing safety, the better. All right. So what I encourage people to do is to first cut it in half. I always say it's faster to peel 2 halves of an onion than trying to peel 1 whole onion. And we're typically going to be cutting it up into smaller pieces anyway. You can use your paring knife in this case to help remove the skin. 1 or 2 layers is usually sufficient. So there are 2 basic cuts that we can use, whether it's for a stir fry or any other recipe. A basic sliced onion, all right, and a diced onion. We'll start with the sliced onion first. And for this, important thing to point out to the participants is how they hold the onion. We recommend that they use what's called the claw grip. This is where they take their non-dominant hand, bend the fingertips slightly, and explain that by pushing the knuckles out, okay, instead of the fingertips, if something is going to happen, all right, a worst case scenario, they might cut a little bit of their knuckle instead of cutting their fingertips. So bending that, just gently pressing your fingertips into the product so it's secure and it's not moving anywhere, and then moving on to the next step. How you hold the knife is very important as well, all right, for safety reasons and also to ensure accurate cuts, okay? The more accurate and the more efficient you are, the more enjoyable the process becomes. So holding the handle closer to the blade, okay, securing it just where the handle meets the blade, and never extending your finger out on top of the blade. It's bad practice, it's hard on your fingers, and it can actually cause the knife to move around, which could cause a slip and or cuts. So a firm grip on the handle. One of 2 techniques that will teach the participants. The first is called the slicing motion, and this is where you take the knife, starting in the middle, you push down and forward. This allows you to slice the onion nice and thin. Remind the participants that it's never a race when working with a knife, all right? It's more important that we get comfortable with it. We watch what we're doing. As we get towards the end of the onion where things get a little wobbly, I recommend that we flip it over and we repeat the same slicing process. All right, and there we have a sliced onion, okay, incorporating the claw grip. And using our slicing technique, and something that we can use for many other vegetables as well. The next cut we'll do is a diced onion. And again, either of these cuts can be used for your stir fry or for a wide variety of recipes. To dice an onion, what we want to do, again, make sure it's laying on its flat side so it's not rolling around. We'll use our claw grip. And this time, we're going to make cuts following the natural grain or the lines in the onion. We want to insert the point or the tip of the knife in first, press down, and then bring the knife back. We're cutting about 90% of the way to the back of the onion. Okay. And then we're going to turn the onion and bring it closer to us. For our next cut, we're going to hold the top of the onion. We're going to make one cut across the center. Now, I do caution that people take extra care when making this cut, especially when working with sharp knives, because it could easily come out the other end of the onion. So you just want to, again, take extra care. After that, what we're going to do, again, go back to our claw grip, and we're going to cut through the onion about the same width as our initial cuts. And same thing when we get near the end. If it gets a little wobbly, we'll flip it down the side and we'll finish the cut. Now, while this technique may seem a little complex at first, people tend to be more comfortable with a sort of chopping, mincing technique. All right. Once participants get used to this, they'll find it actually a lot faster and a lot more consistent. So they'll be able to cut their onions the way they want them much faster. So that's a diced onion, and this is what we're going to be. It's now ready for your chicken stir fry. For the carrots, we'll need to peel the carrots first. Make sure we wash the carrot, and if it has the green on top, we can trim that off with using our paring knife. Now, using a peeler is pretty straightforward, and it's pretty safe as well. We can cut our carrots in a variety of different ways, whether you want to slice them up, as we will for our stir fry, or cut them into sticks for veggie sticks, okay, or a vegetable tray. The first cut we'll look at is our sliced carrot rounds. Now, we've talked about the slicing technique as the first technique that we'll use. The second common technique is what's called the rocking motion. And the rocking motion starts off similar to any other cut in that we're going to hold it again where the blade meets the handle. We're going to focus on the middle of the blade, okay? And that's an important thing to point out to the participants because people tend to use the tip of the knife a lot. The tip is very hard to control, okay? And from a food safety perspective, again, using the tip, there's much more potential for cutting ourselves. So we want to focus on the middle of the blade, and we want to make sure that the front of the blade is always touching the board. So again, claw grip and stress that as much as possible. And another thing to point out with this is that the hand has to slowly move back as we make the cut. Okay, so here we go. So we're rocking the knife back and forth. slowly inching our hands back towards the end of the carrot. The second cut, carrot sticks. Now, from a value perspective, with so many prefab vegetables out there, it's worth stressing the fact that you can buy a bag of well, quote unquote regular carrots for a relatively low price, okay, and cut them up into smaller pieces instead of buying what they call baby carrots and paying a premium price for something that really was a regular carrot to begin with. It was just polished and peeled down to an appealing size and shape. So by using some of these basic techniques, we can again hold the carrot in a safe and secure fashion. All right, we can make a cut on one side, very thin, and then roll the carrot over. And what this does is it gives us a flat surface to work from. And this is going to sort of prevent the carrot from rolling around too much, which is going to make it a lot easier to handle. So very simply, hold the carrot on each side, push the knife down and through, push it through, and we have carrot sticks. Quick and easy to do, delicious, nutritious, and much easier on the budget. Our carrots are now ready for your stir fry. Now, peppers are round. They have a tendency to roll. Okay, so just finding a resting spot so it's not going to roll around too much on you. I recommend cutting off the top and the bottom of the pepper. All right, like this. Now, the key here is to make sure you use this. Sometimes people think because it's cut off like that, that it's garbage. There's nothing wrong with that part of the pepper. All we need to do is just cut it up and make sure that gets incorporated into the dish. We'll start by cutting this in half, and then we'll cut it into one half into quarters so we can show the two different cuts. We can move to a smaller knife. We've looked at the paring knife. Might be a good opportunity to look at the boning knife. It's something smaller that allows you to get into the pepper to remove the membrane, all right, because that's bitter part of the pepper, and also to knock out the seeds. So you want to start with pieces that are relatively even in size, and we can achieve that by cutting off the top and the bottom and cutting it in half like this, right? Now, with peppers have this sort of almost leathery skin, and sometimes it's difficult for your knife to go through that skin, especially if your knife isn't overly sharp. So what I recommend we do is we actually flip it over and cut it from the inside. It's much easier to cut a pepper this way. You push down a little bit. Again, focus on that claw grip. Cutting from the inside of the pepper first. We've got some nice pepper strips. We can use that as little snack veggies. We can cook them up in our stir fry. Moving on to the second half of the pepper. Same deal. Working with a smaller knife, either your boning knife or your paring knife. We'll remove the inside, and for this we'll cut that in half. And what we'll do is we'll cut this into a dice. And start off very similar to the first cut. Again, cutting inside the pepper first. And keep in mind with this cut, you can show them any number of sizes, from a small dice to a large chunky dice, depending on what you're making. The technique is the same, it just means your cuts might be a little bit closer or a little bit wider apart. For our ends, rocking motion for a thin sliced pepper, depending on the look or what you're going for your particular recipe. So sliced peppers, diced peppers. Now you have peppers that are ready for your stir fry. All right, the next part of the module, in preparing our chicken, we're going to demonstrate how to butcher a whole chicken. Now, generally speaking, it's always more economical approach to purchase a whole chicken and cut it up with yourself, again with the right tools and the right know-how. With this chicken, what I'm going to do first is remove the chicken thighs and chicken legs by separating a little bit of the fat that connects the breast to the leg, and then making a cut through the bone. I'm able to quickly and easily remove the chicken leg. I'll flip it over to the other side and demonstrate. Now, the best tool for this job is the boning knife, as we mentioned earlier in the module, the right tool for the right job, and this will make it go safe, quick, and efficient. Now, to finish our chicken leg, what we can do is flip it upside down. I look for a little line here, I call it the fat line, and then I just kind of wiggle my blade, looking for that separation or the knuckle, okay, that connects the two pieces, and we end up with our thigh and our leg. The last thing we do is we remove the skin, and we now have a skinless chicken thigh, okay, which is great for stir fry and just simply cooking on its own. Now, removing the bones from thighs, again, is quick and easy. Flipping it upside down, sliding the knife underneath. We can take this and we can cut that up. Chicken thighs are a great alternative to breasts. They tend to be a lot cheaper. They have more flavor. They do have a little bit more fat, but when trimmed properly, they can be just as delicious and nutritious as the white meat. Next, we're going to work with the chicken breast here, and removing chicken breast is a lot easier than people realize. Yes, there's bones to contend with, okay? However, a little bit of practice, we can make pretty quick work of removing the chicken breast. You take off the wings and remove the skin. We have a boneless, skinless chicken breast. For a fraction of the cost if you were to go out and purchase a boneless, skinless chicken breast on its own. All right, I'll flip this around. So, important thing to stress here is to use the tip of the knife. Okay, literally just follow the bones, and it's kind of like peeling meat off of the bones. Now, the bones can be used for other things. I often recommend making your own chicken broth. For our chicken and vegetable stir fry does call for broth, so we could do the potential there to save even more money by making our own. And you'll have some chicken broth to use for other things as well, like homemade soup. I remove the tenderloins, take my French knife, okay, trim off the fat, and then what we'll do is we'll cut this into thin strips that will be suitable for the recipe. Simply make the cut. Once we're done, we now have sliced boneless, skinless chicken breast. All right, easy to do with a little bit of practice and the right equipment. Again, the potential to save money by purchasing the whole chicken and breaking it down yourself. All right, as you prepare for your part 2 of the kitchen safety module, there are a few things you may want to consider. First of all, find out if any of the participants have any food allergies and to build your recipe choices around that. Secondly, if you have space within your budget, providing a knife and or cutting board for your participants so they can take a knife or cutting board home with them and practice the skills that they've learned. Lastly, if you feel that you'd like to have a chef come in to assist with this particular module, feel free to contact the Food Families Coordinator. Lastly, have fun.